There we go. And we're live. Sorry for the delay, folks. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, May 4th, 2022. We're going to be following the agenda that was posted in issue 583 of the NPM RFC's repo. Just a quick reminder, as with all these calls, we follow a code of conduct. We ask you to please be kind to each other while on the calls. Also, please be respectful and raise your hand if someone else is speaking. Quickly, announcements. Just a reminder, you've been sharing the NPM v9 roadmap. We're keeping that up to date with breaking changes that we know of that we're making, as well as some features and fixes that we'd like to get into the next major version of v9. So I think that there in the agenda, as well as many folks from our team are going to be attending OpenJS World. Would like to keep that on folks' radar. If you haven't already grabbed a ticket and are interested, we'd love to see you in person or virtually. There's also virtual attendance available. So it would be nice to collaborate with folks there. I know for myself, I'll definitely also be going to the Collab Summit, as well as Roy and Miles Borns from our team will be speaking at the conference, which is awesome. So any other announcements from folks you want to share? If not, we can dive right into the agenda that we got, starting with issue 572. I believe we had, oh, sorry, I got the right meeting notes doc. So I think I was looking at the wrong one. Okay, 572, this is remove access public for NPM publish. I think we had a good discussion on this last week with Tierney when Tierney was here. I don't know what the action items were, but my guess is that we can probably just open up a backlog issue on my teams. I think I did that already, potentially. I think I added it to the v9 roadmap. So we could probably close this. Any thoughts, comments? Jordan, I see you're on mute.
Well, yeah, what we talked about was that I thought was that the two changes that would make it helpful is this change combined with asking in npm init if you're going to publish it, and then having the default value in npm 8 for this config be true, right? Like
private true.
Private false is the default in npm 8, right? However we word it, right? And then in npm 9, flipping that so that by default it's private true, and then the combination of those two things will mitigate any risk, I think, of, eventually, of implementing our 572. Which like given that plan, like I think it's fine to just move forward with 572 also in parallel.
And what was the flag you were?
Just so the exact naming of the flag we can bike shed later, but some npm init question where the answer of it determines if it's private true or private false, and an associated config value. And the default in npm 8 would match current behavior, and the default in npm 9 would flip so that private true was effectively the default.
Yeah, I think I put those both actually into the v9 roadmap, but one needs to be in v8. That add npm init private config needs to be added to
right. Because that way folks can like opt into the npm 9 behavior early and opt out of the npm 9 behavior early, and then the breaking change is not a big deal.
I'm just going to quickly update those. Cool. I think we can close that then.
Oh, good.
Closing. Yeah, that is done. Moving on to 571, make npm update useful. I know Tierney's not here, but want to bring this up again. It looks like somebody's chimed in. I know that there's some work we said we could potentially do in terms of the range. I know Tierney actually added the notes about the specific range flag that we were sort of talking about last week. I'm not sure if anybody else has had any more thoughts on this since that. Would this be enough, do you think? I mean, I know Tierney's not here, but.
I remember the conversation last time steered into the interactive kind of interface too.
Because that's separate. Yeah, we can. Yeah.
At the end, we wanted to bring it back to.
I think the challenge is that it's tough to know if the lower level commands, like the direct commands, are what people need. Because the way that they're all going to be thinking about it is with an interactive thing. And they're going to be having to do that translation in their head anyway. And it may, even if npm doesn't implement an interactive mode initially, designing one will probably lead to a much better set of low-level commands because the use cases will be better understood. So that was why I brought it up, because I think that's the best way to come up with to answer the question of what low-level direct thing do we need, because nobody's thinking about nobody's mental model is going to be like command line args for this. It's going to be like, I want to update this transitive dependency to get rid of an audit warning, or I want to upgrade this package. So, I want to, for the sake of deduping or to get some new feature, right? And it's the more npm can translate their intention to the dependency graph for them, the better. And I think it's entirely achievable to craft command line args to do that, but we have to know what those paths are first.
That to me seems like an interesting alternative. Like maybe we could just work on a proof of concept that interactive does that work, like kind of a holistic experience that will help drive the low-level API design. Yeah. But I would say to start out as a separate thing, just as a proof of concept.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worthwhile because there's enough tooling out there that makes this, if we're not going to help you manage your packages, and management includes update your packages in a reasonable way, then we're not doing our job. So I'm totally okay with us investigating or spending time doing a POC of what interactive looks like, especially for update. So even if it doesn't apply more holistically, I know that was one of the keys that we were talking last week. It's like, okay, we want to introduce interactive against a whole bunch of things. Well, we prove out what we want to do, whether it's just a flag for update that allows you to into an interactive flow, which is different than,
yeah. I'm envisioning essentially a holistic design that needs many different small pieces to be viable. And maybe we only ship 80% of those pieces, but at least then we know that the pieces are moving in a good direction and compose well together.
Yeah, and it can start simple, like something as simple as using npm update, piping that into IPT, like having a dynamic like interactive interface, and then the output of that gets sent up to npm update. So it can be as simple as a one-liner, right? Like using npm exec npx, piping all these into another. But yeah, it might be like a good way to approach problem. Yeah.
I'll backlog a ticket then for this, like a POC for interactive. I do think that we need the range flag before that though, because there's no way to like opt into updating outside of the current range. So it's almost like a precursor to that.
It's like the equivalent of the npm outdated having the one that in the latest. Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like even if like the available ranges to update to in an interactive mode would be limited unless you were doing basically npm install, right? And yeah, so which is not what we want update to be. So okay, cool. Any other comments on that for update improvements? Once. Okay, moving on to Jordan's RFC 570 workspace tag version prefix config. Don't know if we talked about this last week. I forget.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, we did. Okay. We can probably.
I don't think we ended up in a conclusion, but we did talk about it.
I thought we had agreed on the prefix.
Oh, awesome.
For
so then, great.
But, yeah.
Yeah, I think the only open question looking at our RFC again is single commit or multiple commits, and I think people have different intuitions. So, but
it's also a matter of what can get done.
Right, totally fair. Yeah, but yeah, I guess my assumption when I run a command at the root of a workspace on multiple child workspaces is that it runs all the commands conceptually in parallel or like ordered by dependencies, but they're all run. And then at the end of all the commands being run is when it would do git operations. So I would expect but I can see the other, so that expectation leads me to say one commit for multiple workspaces, but I can see the opposite expectation of it's CDing into each one and running the npm version command, thus creating multiple commits. But then you get into ordering questions, and because it's conceptually it's happening in parallel, and you'd want that ordering to be deterministic, and so you'd have to sort things, and so it just kind of, I don't know what's an easier approach, but either way, I can see people wanting both behaviors.
Yeah, the easiest way forward is just to continue like that. Right now, it works like the CD approach, where we're just going in there and running npm version. And if you want to manage things in a more sophisticated way, then you can just opt out of creating a commit and then essentially have everything in a single commit, right? And we have that available. That's available today through.
And I think that's a defensible rationale, is basically to manually get the other behavior is easier when the default is multiple commits than when the default is a single commit. And so we might, although npm might support both eventually, this is the current MVP. That seems like a defensible answer, but we just have to have decided it.
Yeah, I think right now we can use the template. Is this just we need to backlog this to do, to add workspace tag version prefix, and that gets used when or creating a commit. That was what I thought this was. Yeah, the outcome.
Yeah, it's basically just an additional config around the tag prefix that applies to workspaces, and whether it replaces, like overrides the existing one, or whether it composes with it is a different question. Composing might be nice, but like, and then the spelling of that new config is also, a bike shed. So, but it seems straightforward to implement to me. Sorry, I see Gar's hands up.
Yeah, we're talking about our release process today, and this and the tag parameter itself need to be able to be templatized. So that's just going to have to be part of this work. There's no way it can just be a string. It has to be templatized in some way, otherwise.
Yeah. And it's currently just a string, right? Like it's just a string.
Well, it doesn't exist.
No, but I mean, there's the prefix for non-workspace usage is just a string. So yeah, it does make sense to me that that a holistic solution would be just a straight up template for the tag that replaces the existing config and includes a workspace thing. But then you have to get into optionality, because I'd want a config that would work for both simultaneously, a non-workspace project and a workspace project. And I would want a space between the workspace name and the version name, but I would only want that space present when there were workspaces. So it's not quite as straightforward as one template.
Yeah, now you're asking for conditional logic.
No, it'll have to be a separate config because of that.
Yeah, so if you have two templates, one for workspace, one for not, that also answers it. Yeah.
Okay. I've taken down 2 new to-dos or features essentially for those configs. We can probably close this since we'll have tickets now.
So the action item, you're creating the backlogging tickets.
Yeah. Likely coming in V9. Unfortunately, since we're limiting how much we're trying to get done for V8 right now, and notably should start to have release candidates for V9 in the coming months. So, cool. Moving on to our RFC 569. This is the npm RFC file should be valid for any dependency, whether direct or indirect. Did I get a chance to? Oh, I did get a chance to look at this. What did I say here? Oh, I think this is just, yeah, I don't think this is, I think this person is trying to define packages with the same name and reference them, and unfortunately was doing that from different registries. So I just told them to investigate scopes. So they haven't followed up. And yeah, unless somebody else reads into this something different, that was my understanding of the issue.
This does ring about a similar RFC we had from Isaac a while ago on, I think it was different protocols for defining different registries.
We do have a registry protocol RFC that has been accepted, so we can eventually implement that. But I think this has to do with aliases and actually just package definitions. I could be wrong.
Okay, yeah, we can follow up on the issue. Yeah, we can move on to the next one.
Moving on to RFC 566, command-specific configuration, which I have not been able to update. The last note we made here was to document all the commands with subsequent commands. So basically doing a bit of an audit. Example, npm install might run npm pack for git dependencies, and we want to know this and have this mapped out as part of this RFC so that we can explain to folks, I think reasonably, what the, when configuration is going to be applied to what command. And this will also, I think, allow us to have a more sophisticated discussion around whether or not we want cascading configs to be applied in those cases. My personal thought and opinion is no, that essentially the config should only be skipped to that specific command. And if you happen to execute another command when running install or something else, that you should essentially copy over the config. But other folks might have differing opinions on that. And I know that we do share today, I do think we do share today the config object between those. So.
Well, I think there needs to be a audit. In other words, like a differentiation between when users are supposed to think about it. Like when a user runs npm publish, they're supposed to be aware, or they are allowed to be aware or encouraged to be aware that it is calling npm pack, right? It's not quietly doing the same thing. It's actually calling npm pack. And so pack specific config should of course apply when you run publish. But there may be, especially with the query RFC, there may be a bunch of things that are like, for example, doing the same thing as npm ls or something, but that aren't conceptually calling it. And those shouldn't use ls specific config. And so in other words, I think that we need to be very deliberate about which commands conceptually invoke which other commands, and only for those should the config be passed along. And then the others, that's just internal implementation details. And it would be relatively easy, I think, to maintain that explicit list in documentation and then use it as the source of truth.
Yeah. So I think it's still just outstanding to do. So, but I think it's a precursor to accepting the RFC or blocking. So, yeah, any other updates on that or any other comments folks want to have about command specific config? If not, we'll move on to the RFC 564 dependency selective syntax and npm query. Again, I haven't had time to update this. The last notes I know were to, I think, remove blessed attribute names from the top level and nest those in a pseudo selector. And this, I think, allows us to not have name collisions with other pseudo, with other attributes or other pseudo classes. So I know that was one of the things that I brought up that needs to be done and fixed about the RFC itself. But otherwise, I think it's in pretty good shape. I still haven't addressed maybe some of the comments that Jordan and I see we've left, but I'll try to get to those by next week. Cool. Any other comments, or did anybody have any feedback on query? It's definitely something we want to get to soon. It's something I would love to see ship with V9 as a reason to update and check that out. It's kind of a big feature that is landing in a major. So I'm going to do my best here to clean that one up specifically. Command specific configuration is as well. I just don't know if it's going to have more dragons than net new command. So, cool. Moving on to 559, expanding behavior of before to support date adjustment or essentially relative dates. I think we can remove this off the agenda. I think everybody's pretty much +1 so long as I know the feedback around trying to make this look as similar to new date syntax. I know Jordan, you brought that up last week or the week before.
Yeah, I mean, I brought up new date syntax, but I basically said if there's going to be any changes, we should be looking at temporal. And temporal durations do have a like relative date syntax that's different from what the Unix date tool is. And so the motivation of saying, well, on Windows, you can't run the date command also is sort of an argument not to use the DSL from that command because Windows users won't have any familiarity with it. But they will be JavaScript users most likely, and they will eventually be familiar with the temporal syntax. So like the concept sounds great to me, but the exact DSL in use, I think should be temporal, or like if we're going to do it.
Yeah, I guess the one like comment I would have back to that is just like the syntax for temporal uses like that from, so we could use that as the.
Oh, I mean, I'm talking about there's like these, so I don't even know them off the top of my head because temporal's not even stage 4 yet, but there's this syntax like that's a standard thing that's like 3R for, I don't know, there's like, it's like numbers and letters, and it's a way to describe a relative time period. And eventually that syntax, that's a DSL I expect JavaScript users to be somewhat familiar with. And it seems like it's probably, I believe it's based on a more reliable standard than like what a random Unix tool has chosen to support 20 years ago.
Try and find that. I can't see it.
Yeah, I'll try and look it up and maybe comment it.
Yeah, just because the only docs I found, which I shared with folks here, is using like objects, which don't map quite well to like a value in a.
So it's right here. Let me paste the link. So that page describes the ISO 8601 standard notation. For example, P1Y1D is 1 year and 1 day.
Oh, I don't know.
There's a whole table. And it's, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's intuitive, but it is a cross-platform standard, and it is what temporal will be using. And, and it is also not uniquely localized to English. So it sort of avoids being Anglo-centric in the way that the date command would be.
Because if you take out the P, 1Y, 1D.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and the P could be optional, like NPM could insert that. But like by basically following that standard, then you've delegated all the design decisions elsewhere. You've avoided internationalization and localization concerns, and you've been equally inclusive to Windows users and non-Windows users.
Do you know how close this is to?
I mean, temporal is stage 3. It's still, so it's being actively implemented in browsers behind flags. It's still finding normative changes, like observable changes. So it's not like nobody's going to ship it unflagged until that settles down. But my hope would be within the next year or so that browsers will start unflagging it. And also when it settles down, reliable polyfills will become available and endorsed, and libraries will start to depend on them. So like the landscape right now for temporal is pretty shaky on approachability, but that is going to change as soon as browsers start shipping it, because like Moment is, people are trying, the Moment maintainers have told people to stay away from it, and the other libraries are like not as used as Moment, even though they have similar functionality. And like the existence of temporal will make, my guess is it will make most of them obsolete, and so everyone will just use that. So like,
cool.
Yeah.
Owen, did you want to?
I guess, is there a distinction to be made from what Jordan's proposing, in that we just look to temporal to provide the API? It's not to actually use it under the hood, or I guess would it do both in that regard?
I mean, at the point where NPM supports only nodes that ship temporal, then it would probably be silly not to use temporal for it.
Mm.
And I feel like that should be a design goal, but I don't think
Like
it
a
matters how
forward.
it's implemented under the hood. I think that using its specification for the DSL is the ideal, is the thing I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we would have to do like new date and then from, and then use this like duration value, this like these, yeah.
Right, yeah, like
Whatever's
the
best.
implementation would be temporal.duration.from, maybe adding a P, and then whatever the input is, and it will just work.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like, if you like the API, great, then figure out, do you polyfill it for now or align it with a, something. But I guess it's just, if you like the APIs, maybe just the first good question. And then potentially the knock-on effect is you have a standard implementation for it to code against and to document against.
This would be in Node Core as well, right? Like we would have a,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
I mean,
so
it'll probably be in Node behind a V8 flag. Like it, for all I know, it's already there, but it's just, it'll be in Node unflagged shortly after it's in Chrome unflagged. And then a few years after that, NPM will be able to rely on it always being present. And in the intervening time, I happen to know somebody who makes polyfills who will be providing a polyfill NPM could choose to use and then drop at that future time.
okay.
So there's paths forward there.
Cool. Okay, cool. I think we can drop this from the agenda then, and you can just backlog a ticket for it. So. Like shed the name later if we don't like it. What was the name that Miles proposed before relative? Is there a better name? No. Cool. Moving on quickly, we got about 15 minutes left. I apologize for keeping things off so late. Moving into RFC 550, improving signature verification. I know, Gar, you've been working closely with Philip. I'm not sure if you have an update on any of the work that he's been doing.
We're working on it. It's kind of in the early phases. You might have seen Pacochi had a new release where the signature is in the manifest if the integrity checked. So at least we can have that as a signal that it's ready to sign. We still need to work through where the keys, I mean, it's in the RFC, but like how we get that into the config, what does it mean to be there? When is it used? Just some of the subtleties of it. It shouldn't take too much longer, but just questions that need to be answered. Initially, this is going to be a separate command. Hopefully it can be baked into install with signaling. Like if I provide you the keys, then do the signature verification kind of a thing.
In terms of the RFC, I don't think, is there any updates that we need to make to it, or can you just accept or ratify this? Because like
the only thing I'd commented was it would be really nice if there was a config that defaulted to off that automatically verified signatures at the end of install. The reason to start it off is both because it's not, it might be a breaking change, and also because there was a concern that it might be slow. But like, I would assume that the hope would be to eventually default it to on, because there's like, as long as this is fast enough, there's no reason anyone wouldn't want to run it by default.
Yeah, I don't see the need for us to implement maybe a flag in V8 right now when we're so close to cutting V9 that essentially we could turn on signature verification by default.
Yeah, I mean, if the default flip would have to wait for V10, then you're right. There's no rush to implement that. But it seems plausible to land the functionality in V8 and then be able to flip the default in V9 if it appears like there's right. And then that gives people an escape hatch if it's slow for some people or if it's like not exactly what they want. Right. Like because within V9, you could always flip the default back. You just have to wait to a major in order to turn it on. So like there's value in getting it on in time for V9.
I get what I'm saying is like most of our flags for any functionality that we want to opt out of in install is essentially like no fund, no audit, no like so defaults, no signature validation.
Well, this would be like no audit is a broad thing because audit will eventually include vulnerabilities, licenses, and signatures. And so like essentially what I would assume is that if you have no audit, they're all off, but we would be adding new sub flags like no audit signatures, no audit, vulnerabilities or whatever terminology we use there. And then like, we can get all those flags in and then the defaults can be whatever we need them to be. And then people can override them as they need it. And, like eventually we're going to need that set of config anyway. Right. And maybe it would be simpler with command specific config because then it doesn't need to be added except under audit. So like maybe the priority order should be command specific config before a lot of other things. But I guess it seems like an opportunity miss to prioritize V9 before getting in as many non-breaking things as possible, because it is in NPM's best interest to make the experience of migrating across majors for users as easy as possible. And the more things that are in V8 and can be toggled and can be put in npm-rc to protect against V9 breaking changes, the easier it will be for people to migrate to V9 and keep the same behavior. And the earlier NPM will be able to get feedback about functionality and in general.
The idea would actually be, and this hasn't been widely communicated, but we would start to cut release candidates for V9 here this summer and essentially have a few months of cutting release candidates while not essentially cutting V8 releases unless there's like a major security issue. And that then allows us to make breaking changes, implement new features, and sort of do a bunch of the work that we need to do to flip a bunch of bits for a different config, which is why like trying to land like extra config or even this feature in V8 is like. But
that approach is why there's a bunch of people still complaining on the CLI repo that they can't migrate from 7, because that entire period where you're pretending like the next one is just a candidate and you're pretending like the old one is still supported, the old one is dead and the new one is the real one. And so that's basically a lie. Like, like if it's a release candidate, you're still supporting and making changes to the existing one. And if you're not doing that, don't call it a release candidate. It's just V9. And that's the latest support, the only supported one.
It would be any security related.
Yeah,
issues,
but
right?
the security related things is a like ethics or like responsibility thing. I'm saying like, if you're unwilling to add new features to a previous major, then you don't have a release candidate. You've just released it and you're just mislabeling it as a candidate. A V9 release candidate should still be new features landed in V8 until it's promoted to full.
We can't make breaking changes to
within release candidates. You absolutely can. Pre-releases are always breaking between them, so you can do that.
That's essentially what I'm saying is we're going to start doing that. So
but I'm saying that what this will end up in is that there will be a bunch of new features that have never landed in V8 that have landed within V9 during candidates that users will not have been able to get feedback on, that they will not be able to use and lock in their config within V8, which will make the upgrade to the final V9 harder. I'm saying that I'm suggesting that approach to doing releases without is not actually a good thing unless you are adding the new
release
things
lines, Jordan. I'm just saying we can't maintain 2 release lines, and
that's fine. I'm not saying you must. I'm saying that because you can't, V9 should probably wait until all the new features are done being added, such that the change from V8 to V9 is like dropping node versions and flipping defaults. And that makes it a much simpler release process for you. It still is only 1 line at a time to maintain, and it's much, much easier for the users to upgrade, which I would hope is the most important consideration.
I agree, but it's not part of this RFC. We can have that discussion somewhere else. This is essentially a net new command. This can land in V8. Whether or not it's a part of install, I would fight for not including in V8. And whether there's a config to turn it on for install, I would fight to not include in V8 is what I'm basically saying with all that. Whether it lands as new signature in time, this is the other thing. This is being contributed by a team within GitHub. Their time to do this, whether or not it lands within the time frame that we are accepting features for V8 is questionable. So I can't speak to that. In terms of whether this is complete as an RFC, I would love to say that it is, and a separate RFC or consideration for whether or not we have a flag for doing this check in install can be made. I think that's kind of where I'd love to draw the line. So I'm not sure, if based on your work with Philip, if there's anything in the RFC that is wrong based on the initial work that you've done in Pacoche, or that needs to be changed. But maybe we can just ratify this this command by itself.
I don't think there's anything wrong in it.
Sorry, I was muted. I don't see anything.
Because it doesn't speak to anything about install yet, right? Yeah. Okay, let's backlog that as a to-do to ratify it by next week. And that gives, hopefully also is a big plus or big thumbs up to Philip and his work. We only have about 4 or 5 minutes left. I want to get to another item here. This RFC 549 is very similar to, I think, the other relative before flag, except it's speaking, I think, to per package before policies, which I see, Jordan, you've jumped in on. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think this will be harmful. I think that if we get the ability to, if we create the ability and tacitly encourage people to dynamically wait a little bit longer before getting packages, the net effect will be that security problems take longer to be discovered, and we will be back to having no gain. And so, in other words, it's not that the functionality being requested is a problem, it's that the motivation, I think this is a poor solution to that problem.
So is that not similar to the other RFC story? Would you not have the same kind of feedback for? It's
a similar risk with the relative, because if you can encode the relative one in your config, then you gain the ability to do this. I think in both, in the relative one, the motivation is I'm debugging why this worked yesterday. And so it solves the motivation. In this case, the motivation is we
Tell
think
me about
that
this later.
Yeah, it's we think that if we wait longer, somebody else will suffer the vulnerability and we'll find out about it in time. And I don't buy that motivation. And I think that trying to ship anything that solves that is intended to solve that motivation, I think would be harmful. like, and also that like anyone with this concern has an internal registry, and they can configure their internal registry to like hide packages that are less than a week old or whatever, like with no work on the behalf of the NPM team. So like if, and all of these folks, like they can ask, you know, they can make a PR to Verdaccio, or they can ask Artifactory or whoever they're using to implement something like this if that's a feature that is that desired. But like, I just don't see anyone who's this security conscious isn't solely depending on the public registry. So like, why does the public registry need to support this?
They also go beyond, I think, just the setting of per package, relative dates. Oh, no, if I see you, what did you say? Overrides could be used anyway. You'd have to go look at the version, what version was available for you, decide for time frame, lets you lock down any arbitrary package. Did you want to expand on that? No, for now.
Sure. I just mean, if you're talking about installing specific packages or a specific set of packages before a given date, then there's no reason you couldn't just know what those versions are and use an override to not allow something newer than those to be installed. Like, I feel like this use case is already covered in kind of a roundabout way.
Right. Because if you know when to lock in, I think the interesting feature is doing it per package, setting like that, essentially that it's almost like a Semver range, right? Or spec, like wanted information that we would pass to the co-chair or pick manifest, I guess. But also they've added here, which I think is kind of completely expands this, is they've added like policies essentially. So like error, info, warn to this config, which I think is yeah, it's a lot. And yeah, Gary, yeah, you said these policies should be set by the registry. Totally. I think this is something we can discuss again. I don't know necessarily like how and or why we'd want to have before specific policies for individual packages, but I think that's the proposal that is, I guess, interesting, at least for me. The policies is something that's, yeah, I don't think something you would want to pull in. And then the reason for why you'd want to use this, maybe there's already like a workaround we can provide this user as the current MILFs feedback. Maybe you can tell them to use overrides if they're super security conscious and want to be locking in, and or use a lock file and and just don't ever update your dependencies. Anyways, I apologize. We're a couple minutes over already and essentially at time. If we didn't get to an item that you're hoping to talk about, you can catch us next week. Same time, same place. And I appreciate everybody jumping on today, including furry friends. Yeah, hopefully chat with you next week, folks. Bye.